Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Two Peas in a Podcast via Zoom. I am your co-host, Amelia, joined by the lovely Carls.
Hi.
So today we're going to be talking about regulating emotions in elevating situations. So I think I actually had an example of this that happened yesterday. So I was working from home and a lady calls in and she's angry because she wants what she wants. People are short over quarantine. COVID's getting to them. And she's just not being very nice to me. And I'm just on the phone with her trying to de-escalate the situation, but she just keeps going at me. And I finally said to her, there's no need for you to be aggressive here. I'm simply the messenger. This is not my fault. Let's have an alternative way to talk about the situation. And she's going off at me and then eventually does apologize and says, I didn't mean to be aggressive. I'm sorry. And we were able to kind of work it out. And it was very fitting for this topic because it was a situation that when somebody is coming at you, whether it's in person or it's on the phone, I think our learned reaction is to fight back and be combative. Because in that situation, I feel like I've grown because I didn't want to yell back, but catch me 4 years ago, I probably would have wanted to yell back. So I've learned kind of to be a little bit more calm towards people in these situations because really yelling at them, it's not going to do any good. So their situation was de-escalated because of my reaction to her. And I just see it playing out so many different ways if I would have screamed back or if I would have hung up on her or whatever I could have done. So I think it's really valuable to know that when you're in a situation that's elevating, learning how to stay calm, assert yourself when you need to. I think they're kind of the best ways to handle situations like that.
Nice. Wow, good for you. That sounds like a tough situation. And it sounds like you handled it brilliantly. And the fact is, when somebody else, we often think about ourselves being elevated, but I'm glad that you kind of put it in a different way. She was quite elevated, and she could have also elevated your behavior too, right? So the fact is, when somebody else is elevated and say we're right in front of them or we're in the same room or whatever, they are activating our fight or flight response. And so you could have let your naturalistic, your urges come through, and you could have gotten aggressive and up in her face over the phone. You could have done a whole bunch of different things, but you didn't. And so I'm curious how you chose to get out of that loop. I'm curious how you chose the other response.
Why I chose it or how I chose
it? How you did that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I know, good question. I think the way that I did it was to assert boundaries because she was being quite aggressive towards me, and I had to verbally say to her, there's no need for you to be aggressive in this situation. We're just going to try to find a different way to talk about this. So I think there's this fine line with regulating our emotions, right? So we all lose our cool from time to time, and that's genuinely it's okay because we're human beings and we get fired up, we get angry. But I think in that situation, I just didn't see the value in getting angry. I was at work, you want to remain professional. I could understand her concerns too. So I think the way that I did it was trying to understand where she was coming from. She was out of line, but I also tried to understand maybe she's having a really bad day. Maybe she's feeling stressed about COVID. Maybe she's afraid of COVID. There's so many alternating perspectives that I tried to have with her. And also, I just felt like when she was coming at me a little bit more aggressively, drawing that line in the sand and saying, okay, no, you can't talk to me like this. Let's find a different way to do it. I think it was appropriate in setting the boundary where she understood and I reflected back how she was treating me, because I don't know if she really understood. Because later she said I wasn't trying to be aggressive there. So for her, she wasn't seeing the fact that she was coming at me quite aggressively. So kind of flipping the situation back to her and reflecting how she was acting back to her, I think that was profoundly important so that she understood what she was doing, and then she could see how I felt in the situation and I could see how she felt, and then we kind of came to this understanding.
Wow. That's brilliant. So you actually kind of put yourself in her shoes. Why is this happening? Why is she reacting this way? Did you notice? I'm curious if you noticed because usually in these like fight or flight kind of responses, or when somebody's elevated for whatever reason, there's things that are happening in our bodies. So I'm wondering if you noticed that if anything was going on in your body in those moments.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yes, when I am being attacked or if I'm being aggressive or there's just a stressful situation, I get shortness of breath. My heart starts to beat a little bit faster and sometimes I get a little bit shaky. It's like a nervous response. It would be the same. It's like an anxiety response. So that's how I feel when I'm nervous. That's how I feel when I feel threatened, afraid. And so when I'm on the phone with her, it's easier because I'm on the phone with her. I'm not like sitting across from her. But I definitely felt my heartbeat racing and I was a little bit shaky. And even to like verbalize to her to not be so aggressive, after I said it, I'm like, should I have said that? Was that appropriate? Was that appropriate?
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
reflected back and I thought, no, it's okay. When somebody's attacking you, no matter what situation you're in, I think it's okay to say to them, here's my line in the sand. Here's my boundary. I know I'm working, I'm doing a job, but it's still never okay to talk to somebody in that respect.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that example. I I love that. And I love that you like asserted your boundaries. I think that that's can be a really, really hard thing to implement in any situation, but especially when somebody is kind of attacking us for no apparent reason and there really hasn't been, something to prelude that conversation.
Mhm. No, I agree. I think asserting your boundaries is so important. I used to be too nice. Like there's kind of that spectrum of being too nice and letting people kind of walk all over you. And then kindness, which is a word that I think some people don't always understand, is that when you're kind, you assert your boundaries. You don't let people walk all over you. You're firm. And that's a kind, loving reaction because it's helping somebody else understand what they're doing. And then it's also asserting this boundary of, okay, here's my line, don't cross it. And it's a loving response. So I think I've tried to learn how to be more kind and kind of left the niceness behind.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for sharing. Um, I have some things that I have noticed, I mean, in my own personal life, but also when working with clients that have helped in elevating situations. So the first one, I think that Amelia already mentioned this, but taking a deep breath um, is really helpful. What that's gonna do is it's gonna activate our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's going to help actually regulate how our body is feeling and digesting the information that's currently in front of us. So that's going to lower our heart rate. It's going to actually like decrease the temperature of our body. When we get all like hot in our face when we're like ready to go. So it's going to kind of just like calm our body down. So that's like the first tool that can be super useful. For some people in an elevating situation, obviously Amelia didn't have the option to do this, but removing yourself from that situation. I mean, maybe if the lady just kept coming at her, she would have to engage in some sort of practice that was like that. Maybe you would have to actually like leave the conversation, who knows? For some people, they find that that's kind of the only tool that is helpful, especially people with kind of anger management issues that don't know how to cope in those situations. So that can be a helpful tactic. Amelia said, thinking about things from the other person's position. So Amelia is a huge empath, so I feel like that would probably come more naturally to her than maybe some other folks as well. But can be an interesting tool. Examining what's happening in her body. So we kind of went over elevated heart rate. What else did you say? Did you say that you felt did you feel like your palms were clammy? Sometimes that's like a bodily kind of somatic response that people have. But
I do get sweaty palms. Sometimes I didn't that time, but I certainly have. I think the other two things that I had mentioned were increased heart rate and
yeah,
like nervousness, like a little bit of shakiness.
little bit of shakiness. Yeah. So examining what's happening in our body. Sometimes with people who are elevated, and sometimes it works depending on whatever. But there's a tool that I use, it's just a grounding tool, and I think I've mentioned it before. But it's just a 5-4-3-2-1 tool. So 5 is just things that we're noticing, and you notice like right away that the person's reaction is changing when you're like, okay, let's just. Sometimes people, the last thing they want is like, let's just take a deep breath together. But if you throw at them like, what are you noticing in front of you? They're like, what is this person? What does this person want from me? That's crazy. But it engages their nervous system, and all of a sudden they're not reacting to that other thing. They're like reacting to, what is this crazy chick over here trying to get me to do when I'm so amped up? And their body's like, what the heck? And it throws them for a loop, right? So just getting them out of that mental space can be helpful too. What else is helpful? Do you have any other things that you found helpful in like elevating situations?
I have, I think, like 5 tips that I found.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay, so the first one that I found is taking a look at the impact of your emotions. So it's completely normal to experience intense emotions. We're human beings. Of course, we're going to feel deeply, and that's what makes us human. So it's okay. But being aware of how they impact our daily life may help us understand them and keep track of their impact on our lives. Are they helping our lives? Are they making our lives worse? Kind of understanding those emotions. When we make note of how we feel and their impact on our daily life, it may help further understanding with how and why we react the way that we do. So kind of assessing the situation and the emotion and thinking, okay, this was a trigger. Why do I act this way? What about it is engaging that fight or flight mentality, that fight or flight part of your central nervous system where you're getting angry. I think when we're aware of things, it gives it less power over us because we're understanding what's happening in our body. The second one is when learning to exercise control over emotions, make sure you aren't just sweeping them under the rug and not validating the experience. Healthy emotional expression involves finding some balance between overwhelming emotions and no emotions at all. So we always want to kind of find a happy medium because, sorry, my tendency sometimes is to look at my emotions and think that they're wrong. Like if I'm really upset over something, I'm like, well, I shouldn't be upset over that. Why does it even matter? But what I've tried to learn how to do now, like this past year, has really been to look at a situation and think, okay, I'm upset about this. What about it is making me upset? Is it valid? Is it real? Is it something I'm creating in my mind so that I can validate that experience without just pretending like it's not there? Because if we pretend like something's not there, I mean, I'm not sure anybody else, but for me, if I pretend like something doesn't exist, it taunts me constantly. It has more power over me when I try to push it away. So kind of finding a balance between our emotions is so important, and validating the experience, I think, is fundamentally important when trying to navigate elevating situations, especially. And I think that if we practice calming ourselves in intense situations, it's kind of like going to the gym, like you're exercising and say you're doing bicep curls, and then you have to carry a heavy desk. You're going to be able to do that more effectively because you've had practice and you have strength. It's the same with regulating emotions. So if you practice it when you're not elevated, it's going to be easier when you are in the middle of an elevated situation. And then I have a couple more here. So this one's a little bit longer, so bear with me. So the third one is identify what you're feeling, kind of as I talked before. Take a moment to check in with yourself about your mood because it can really help with gaining back that control. So this is an example I found online and I thought it was really interesting. So I kind of wanted to interject here with it. So say you've been seeing somebody for a few months, like romantically. You tried planning a date last week, but they said they didn't have any time. So yesterday you texted them again saying, I'd like to see you soon. Can you meet this week? They finally reply more than a day later and they say, can't, period, busy, period. So very short, curt answer. You're suddenly extremely upset. Without stopping to think, you hurl your phone across the room, knock over your wastebasket, and kick your desk and stub your toe because you're kind of externalizing that anger. So instead of this, or even after you've done this, say you throw your phone, you're angry, you've kicked your desk and you've stubbed your toe. When you're in that moment, just try to stop and say, what am I feeling right now? Maybe it's disappointment, it's confusion. Maybe you're really, really angry because you feel rejected. And then you can ask yourself, what happened to make me feel this way? Maybe it's because they brushed me off with no explanation and I don't understand why. What happened to make me feel this? Or sorry, just said that one. Next one. Does the situation have a different explanation that might make more sense? So this one's really valuable, like looking at the other person's thought process, not just catastrophizing and assuming the worst, which would be this person doesn't like me, they don't value me, they don't want to see me. Maybe there's an alternate explanation. So maybe they're stressed, maybe they're really sick, maybe they're dealing with something that they can't talk about right now, or they don't feel comfortable talking about. Maybe they're going to explain more when they can. You never know. There could be alternate explanations. Another thing is, what do I want to do about these feelings? Do I want to scream? Do I want to vent my frustration by throwing things? Do I want to text back something rude? And then think about, is there a better way of coping with these emotions? So ask them if everything's okay. Ask them if when they're free next. And then if they don't respond further, maybe just leave it. But there is a better way of coping with it versus just sending them something mean or nasty. We all get caught up in the moment. It's okay. But sometimes it's good to just catch yourself and think, maybe there's a better way that I can handle this situation. So by considering those possible alternatives, you're reframing your thoughts, which can help you modify your first extreme reaction. And the next one, number 4, is accepting all your emotions for exactly what they are. I'm angry, I'm angry. I'm happy, I'm happy. Not saying like, I'm angry, so there must be something wrong with me. Just trying to understand why you feel that way is more valuable than just saying like, they don't matter. And the 5th one I found kind of interesting. It was keeping a mood journal. It can kind of help uncover disruptive patterns. So I mean, when you're angry, you're probably not going to write down in your mood journal and say, like, I'm angry today because. But when you're a little bit more calm, you can look back and say, okay, I was angry because of this. And maybe you'll start to see a pattern in your behavior and the triggers that are happening from that. So, yeah, those were the 5 that I found online. And I thought they were valuable, and I want to start to kind of implement them in my life.
Super valuable. Yeah, thank you for those. I think the mood charting is really great. That's a tool that we actually use in therapy quite a lot. So after every session, I will chart somebody's mood, and it is really helpful. We'll chart it together, I guess I should say. But it's interesting to see those patterns and those changes in mood. And then people can kind of think like, oh, well, why have I gone from a 5 to like a 3 this week? That's so interesting. Like, let's further examine that. So very valuable stuff. Thank you.
Of course. I'm glad that you found value. The mood journal is interesting. I'm glad that you do that in therapy too, because when I was reading it, it's not that I hadn't heard of it, but I hadn't really thought about the value of it. But it's so valuable to understand, maybe I'm feeling bad today because this happened. And then you keep seeing that disruptive pattern, and then you can kind of tap
Right.
that pattern.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Also, I wanted to mention, somebody mentioned this today. They were like, well, what about people with depression, and like, how do they regulate emotions and that kind of thing? And so for people with depression, or who have a hard time with regulating their emotions, like people in anger management, for instance, it's basically suggested that some areas of our prefrontal cortex, so the area of the part of the brain that kind of sits right up here up front, up close and personal, that basically it helps to regulate, and it cannot be really properly activated. So this results in kind of like little to no change. And at least this is what scientists think with depression and anger management and those kinds of like non-regulating, well, people who are not able to properly regulate their emotions, but they have these like abnormal kinds of activation patterns. So that could be a reason why it's really hard, and you're like, well, this person's depressed, but like, why aren't they able to like get out of the bed? Why aren't they able to regulate their emotions just like me? And this could be an example of why that might be the case.
Interesting. That's such a good thing to talk about too. I think brain chemistry is important to understand, and just that there is fundamental differences in people who are struggling through depression, PTSD, like taken to another extreme, like bipolar, schizophrenia, all of those diagnoses. It's not as easy as just write your moods down, keep a journal, keep a positive attitude, reframe your thoughts. It's not as easy as that. I think it takes a lot more work when you're struggling. And I know, like, historically for me too, when my anxiety was really bad, or like I was struggling with kind of a bout of depression, I know that getting out of bed was challenging, so I can validate that feeling. My case probably wouldn't have been extreme as other people, but still an experience. And so I know that it's difficult when you're in a really low state to even want to get out of bed. So definitely, I think it's good that you brought that up and to validate that this isn't going to be something that's going to be easy for everybody. Probably won't be easy for anybody, but it might be a little bit more difficult for certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, well that's all that I have. I don't know about you.
That's all. That's all, folks.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening or watching or listening and watching this episode. We hope that these tools are helpful in, regulating your emotions in elevating situations. I know it can be hard, and it's something that we all will have to deal with at some point in our lives. Whether that's dealing with different difficult people, like Amelia brought up that really great example at the beginning, or if it's dealing with our own emotions and how we're feeling in different situations as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing all that up. Thank you for listening, everybody. And yeah, we'll see you on the next Zoom session of Two Peas in a Podcast.